The morning sun barely peeked through the dusty window as Kayla stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Another day, another foster home. The house smelled of old coffee and burnt toast, just like the last one. And the one before that. And the one before that too. 12 homes in 17 years. She'd stopped counting after the 8th move. She ran her fingers through her thick curls, trying to tame them into something presentable for school. The foster system hadn't exactly come with a manual on how to care for black hair, and YouTube tutorials could only teach so much when you're sharing a bathroom with 3 other kids and working with dollar store products. "Hurry up in there," a voice called from the other side of the door. Kayla sighed, gathering her things. The new foster mom meant well, but she treated all the kids like they were still in elementary school. At 17, Kayla felt more like a grown-up than a kid anyway. Her worn backpack sat ready by the door, packed with everything she owned: 3 pairs of jeans, 5 t-shirts, some underwear, and her most prized possession, a small photo album she'd managed to hold onto through every move. The social workers had taught her early on to always keep her stuff packed. You never knew when you'd have to leave. The kitchen was chaos as usual. 2 younger foster kids argued over the last bowl of sugary cereal while their foster mom tried to make lunches and talk on the phone at the same time. Kayla grabbed an apple and her pre-packed lunch from the fridge. She'd learned to be self-sufficient years ago. "Don't forget your permission slip for the field trip," her foster mom called out as Kayla headed for the door. She nodded, even though they both knew she wouldn't be here long enough for any field trip. That's how it always went. The walk to school gave Kayla time to think. She pulled out her phone, a basic model she'd saved up for by babysitting, and checked her grades one more time. All A's, except for that 1 B+ in chemistry. She'd worked hard for those grades, studying late into the night after the younger kids were asleep, doing homework on bus rides between foster homes, and spending lunch periods in the library instead of the cafeteria. College was her ticket out. She'd watched enough kids age out of the system to know what happened without a plan. The streets were full of former foster kids who'd had their dreams crushed. But not her. She had notebooks full of scholarship applications and essay drafts hidden in her backpack. The school hallways were already buzzing when she arrived. Groups of friends huddled around lockers, sharing weekend stories and comparing outfits. Kayla walked past them all, head held high but eyes down. She'd stopped trying to make friends after the 6th move. What was the point when you'd be gone in a few months anyway? Her first class was English, usually her favorite. They were studying The Great Gatsby, and something about the green light at the end of Daisy's dock spoke to her. That distant dream that seemed impossible to reach, she knew that feeling all too well. "We're starting group projects today," her teacher announced, and Kayla's heart sank. Group projects were the worst when you were the foster kid. Nobody wanted to partner with someone who might disappear before the project was done. But then something unexpected happened. A quiet girl from the back row, the one who always had her nose in a book, asked to be Kayla's partner. She didn't make a big deal about it, just pulled her chair over and started talking about their assignment like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this home would last longer than a few months. Maybe she could finally let her guard down just a little bit. But experience had taught Kayla better than to hope. For now, she'd focus on what she could control: her grades, her college applications, and her dream of a better future. As the morning wore on, Kayla felt the familiar weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders. But there was something different in the air today, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. It started like any other Tuesday. Kayla sat in her 3rd period class, half listening to a lecture about polynomials while watching raindrops race down the window. But everything changed when her phone buzzed with a text from her social worker: "Need to see you. Come to the office after class." Her stomach dropped. She knew that message. It was the same one she'd gotten 12 times before. Something had gone wrong at the foster home. Maybe the foster mom had decided she couldn't handle another teenager. Maybe they were moving. Maybe they'd lost their license. The reasons changed, but the result was always the same. Kayla's hands shook as she packed up her books. The girl who'd partnered with her in English class caught her eye and smiled, but Kayla couldn't bring herself to smile back. Another friendship cut short before it could begin. The walk to the school office felt like walking through quicksand. Each step was harder than the last. The secretary gave her a sympathetic look. They'd been through this routine before. "Mrs. Chen is waiting for you in the counselor's office, honey." The social worker sat in one of the hard plastic chairs, her familiar clipboard in hand. Next to her was Mrs. Rodriguez, the school counselor, who'd always been kind to Kayla, but had never seen her like this, about to break. "Your foster mother called this morning," Mrs. Chen started, her voice gentle but professional. "Her mother's sick in Florida. They're moving at the end of the week to take care of her." The words hit Kayla like physical blows. Another move. Another school. Another chance at stability slipping away. She'd been at this placement for almost 4 months, longer than usual. Long enough to start believing that maybe, just maybe, this one would stick. The tears came without warning. Not the quiet, dignified tears she usually managed, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. 3 years of held-back tears, of being strong, of telling herself it didn't matter. It all came pouring out right there in the counselor's office. Mrs. Rodriguez handed her a box of tissues, but instead of staying behind her desk like most adults did when Kayla cried, she came and sat next to her. Her hand was warm and steady on Kayla's back. "I can't," Kayla choked out between sobs. "I can't do this again. I can't start over. I have AP tests coming up. I have college applications. I can't." The room fell silent except for her crying. Mrs. Chen shuffled through her papers, probably looking for another placement, another temporary solution. But Mrs. Rodriguez hadn't moved her hand from Kayla's back. "What if?" Mrs. Rodriguez started, then stopped. She looked at Mrs. Chen, then back at Kayla. "What if you didn't have to move?" Kayla hiccuped, confused. There was always moving. That's how the system worked. "My husband and I," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, her voice soft but sure. "We've been talking about becoming foster parents. We've actually been taking the classes, getting certified. We weren't planning to start for a few more months, but—" Mrs. Chen looked up from her papers, eyebrows raised. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "We have a spare room," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "It's small, but it's yours if you want it, Kayla. No more moving. At least until you finish high school." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Kayla looked at Mrs. Rodriguez's face, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but all she saw was warmth and determination. "But," Kayla wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue, "why would you want me?" Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes filled with tears of her own. "Because I've watched you fight for your dreams every single day. Because you deserve a chance to just be a teenager, to focus on your studies without worrying about where you'll sleep next month. Because my husband and I have so much love to give, and we'd be honored to share it with you." Mrs. Chen was already pulling out forms, her professional mask slipping to reveal a small smile. "We'd need to do some paperwork, expedite a few things, but we could make this work. If that's what you want, Kayla." "Want?" Kayla had stopped letting herself want things a long time ago. Wanting hurt too much when things fell apart. But sitting there in that office, with Mrs. Rodriguez's hand still steady on her back, she let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Later that night, as she lay in her bed at the foster home, staring at the ceiling, Kayla thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's offer. It seemed too good to be true. But then again, sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them, wrapped in packages you never thought to look for. The Rodriguez house wasn't anything fancy. It was a simple 2-story home with faded blue paint and creaky steps leading up to the front porch. But to Kayla, standing there with her backpack and one small suitcase, it might as well have been a mansion. "The paint's a bit old," Mrs. Rodriguez said, fumbling with her keys. "We've been meaning to redo it." She sounded nervous, which was strange. Kayla had never seen her school counselor nervous before. Mr. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was shorter than his wife, with kind eyes and flour on his shirt. "I hope you like lasagna," he said with a warm smile. "It's my grandmother's recipe, but I probably added too much cheese." The inside of the house smelled like garlic bread and something else, something that took Kayla a moment to identify. Home. It smelled like a home. "Let me show you your room," Mrs. Rodriguez said, leading the way upstairs. It's not very big, and the walls are kind of bare, but we can fix that. Maybe this weekend we could go shopping for some posters or pictures. The room was simple. A twin bed with fresh sheets, a desk by the window, a small dresser, and an empty bookshelf. But what caught Kayla's eye was the wall color, a soft shade of purple. Her favorite color. I remembered you mentioned once that you liked purple, Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. We painted it last weekend. I hope that's okay. Kayla's throat felt tight. They had painted a room for her. Not just given her whatever space was available, but actually prepared a room specifically for her. The closet's pretty big, Mr. Rodriguez added from the doorway. And that desk, it was mine in college, solid oak. Got me through medical school. Good studying desk. Kayla set her backpack down carefully on the bed. She was used to living out of her bag, ready to move at a moment's notice. The thought of actually unpacking, of putting clothes in drawers and books on shelves, felt foreign. We cleaned out some bathroom space for you too, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. And I got some hair products. I did some research online about what might work best for your hair type. But if they're not right, we can try others. That's when the tears started. They had researched hair products for her. Such a small thing, but it meant everything. Dinner was a little awkward at first. Kayla wasn't used to sitting at a table, wasn't used to someone asking about her day and actually waiting to hear the answer. Mr. Rodriguez told bad jokes that made his wife roll her eyes, but Kayla could see the love between them in every shared glance. We have some house rules, Mrs. Rodriguez said after dinner, as they sat in the living room. Nothing crazy. Homework first, then free time. Curfew is 10 p.m. on school nights, midnight on weekends. We'd like to know where you are and who you're with, not because we don't trust you, but because we care. Care. That word again. Kayla nodded, trying to process it all. And we'd like to help with college applications, Mr. Rodriguez added. I know some people at the university where I teach. Maybe we could set up some campus tours. Later that night, after helping with the dishes, they hadn't asked her to, but it felt right. Kayla sat on her new bed, and looked around the purple room. She opened her backpack, starting to take things out, then stopped. There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped in, carrying a shopping bag. I got you something, she said, pulling out a fancy-looking memory foam pillow. I noticed you didn't have your own pillow, and everyone needs a good pillow for studying and sleeping. The pillow was the softest thing Kayla had ever touched. She hugged it to her chest, breathing in its fresh, clean smell. Kayla, Mrs. Rodriguez sat on the edge of the bed. I know this is all new and probably a little scary. We don't expect you to trust us right away. Trust takes time. But we want you to know that this isn't temporary for us. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. Home. Such a simple word, but one that had lost its meaning for Kayla long ago. Now here it was, being offered to her along with purple walls and memory foam pillows and people who researched hair products just for her. That night, for the first time in years, Kayla unpacked every single thing from her backpack. She put her clothes in drawers, arranged her few books on the shelf, and placed her treasured photo album on the bedside table. Then she lay down on her new bed, hugged her new pillow, and let herself believe, just a little bit, that maybe this time things would be different. 3 weeks into living with the Rodriguez family, Kayla still jumped every time her phone buzzed. Each notification brought that familiar knot in her stomach, waiting for the message saying it was time to move again. Old habits die hard. One morning, she found herself double-checking that her backpack still contained all her important things just in case. Mrs. Rodriguez caught her doing it. Your drawers are getting empty, she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. The clothes are back in your bag, aren't they? Kayla's hands froze on the zipper. She waited for the lecture, for the hurt feelings, for the disappointment. Instead, Mrs. Rodriguez crossed the room and sat on the purple bedspread. When I was 10, she said, my family lost our house in a fire. For months afterward, I slept with my shoes on, just in case. She reached out slowly and put her hand over Kayla's. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to need time to feel safe. That evening, they had a family meeting. Not the scary kind Kayla was used to, where adults made decisions about her life without asking what she thought. This was different. "We want to talk about making this official," Mr. Rodriguez said, passing her a plate of his famous chocolate chip cookies. "We'd like to become your legal guardians, not just foster parents, but permanent guardians. But only if that's what you want." Kayla stared at the cookie in her hand, watching the chocolate chips slowly melt. "What if," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "What if I mess up? What if I get bad grades or break curfew or—" "Then we'll deal with it," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, "just like any family does. We're not looking for perfection, Kayla. We're looking for you exactly as you are." But trust didn't come easily. The next week, Kayla accidentally broke a glass while doing dishes. She spent an hour hiding in her room, packing and unpacking her bag before Mr. Rodriguez knocked on her door. "I brought reinforcements," he said, holding up a dustpan and 2 ice cream cones. "One for the cleanup crew and one for the supervisor." He smiled that warm smile of his. "Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible supervisor. Always end up eating most of the ice cream myself." Slowly, day by day, Kayla began to realize that maybe, just maybe, this time was different. Mrs. Rodriguez helped her study for her AP exams, staying up late with coffee and flashcards. Mr. Rodriguez taught her to drive in an empty parking lot, remaining calm even when she accidentally hit the curb twice. They celebrated her small victories. An A on her chemistry test, making the honor roll, getting a callback for the school play. But they were there for the hard days too. When she had a nightmare about her old foster homes, Mrs. Rodriguez made hot chocolate at 3 a.m. and sat with her until she fell asleep again. One Saturday, Mrs. Rodriguez took her shopping for new clothes. Not second-hand stuff, but new things Kayla got to pick herself. In the dressing room, she overheard another mother and daughter arguing about a shirt being too expensive. The daughter stormed out, slamming the door. "You okay?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, noticing Kayla's expression. "They don't know how lucky they are," Kayla said quietly. "To be able to argue like that, to know they'll still be family tomorrow." Mrs. Rodriguez wrapped her in a tight hug, right there between the racks of jeans. "You're allowed to argue with us too, you know. We're not going anywhere." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Kayla had been having a bad day. College application stress, a pop quiz she wasn't prepared for, and a headache that wouldn't quit. She snapped at dinner, said some things she regretted immediately. Instead of punishment or packed bags, there was patience. Understanding. Mr. Rodriguez made her tea. Mrs. Rodriguez helped her break down her college essay into manageable pieces. They worked together until midnight, and not once did they make her feel bad about her earlier outburst. That night, for the first time, Kayla left her backpack unpacked in the closet. The next morning, she put all her clothes back in the drawers, one by one, slowly, deliberately. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Rodriguez was making pancakes like it was any other day. But it wasn't any other day. It was the day Kayla finally began to believe that home wasn't just a place you lived, it was a place where you could make mistakes and still be loved. Where you could have bad days and good days, and know that tomorrow would bring another chance. Where your backpack could stay unpacked in the closet, gathering dust, because you weren't going anywhere. Community college wasn't Kayla's first choice, but it was the smart choice. Even with the Rodriguez family's support, starting small made sense. Besides, she could transfer to a bigger university later. What mattered was that she was finally a college student, sitting in her first class, ready to begin the next chapter of her life. The campus coffee shop became her favorite study spot. It was quieter than the library and had better lighting. Plus, the coffee was cheap, and the barista always gave her an extra shot of espresso during finals week. That's where she first noticed him. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordered the same thing, plain black coffee, and sat in the corner with his textbooks spread out. He had kind eyes and a quiet way about him that made him stand out from the louder students who usually filled the shop. One rainy Tuesday, all the tables were taken except the one he was sitting at. Kayla stood there awkward with her coffee, looking around for another spot. "You can sit here if you want," he said, moving his books to make space. "I'm Alex." "Kayla," she replied, sitting down carefully. She pulled out her psychology textbook, trying to focus on studying and not on how his smile made her feel weirdly nervous. They didn't talk much that first day, but somehow they ended up sharing the table again on Thursday and the next Tuesday. and the Thursday after that. Soon it became their unspoken routine. She learned that he was raised by his grandmother after losing his parents young. He understood what it meant to build a family from scratch, to find love in unexpected places. When she finally told him about her foster care journey and the Rodriguez family, he listened without judgment, without pity, just understanding. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, "and sometimes they choose us." Their first real conversation happened over a shared packet of cookies. Their first laugh was about a terrible psychology pun he made. Their first almost moment was when their hands touched reaching for the same sugar packet. But Kayla was careful. She'd learned early that getting close to people meant risking hurt. Even now, with the Rodriguez family proving every day that love could be constant, opening her heart to someone new felt scary. Alex noticed when she pulled back, when she built her walls up. But instead of pushing, he just waited. He shared stories about his grandmother, about working at the local community center teaching kids to play basketball, about his dreams of becoming a physical therapist. "Why do you want to be a therapist?" she asked one day. "Because I know what it's like to need help getting back up," he said. "My grandmother did that for me. Now I want to do that for others." Slowly, story by story, coffee by coffee, Kayla's walls began to crack. She found herself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays, to his silly jokes and thoughtful questions. She liked how he remembered how she took her coffee, how he always saved her favorite spot by the window, how he never pushed but always stayed. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed the change in her. "You're humming," she said one morning as Kayla got ready for class. "You never hum." "There's this boy," Kayla admitted, then quickly added, "but it's not. We're just friends." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled that knowing smile mothers have. Friends is a good place to start. The first time Alex asked her to join him for dinner after studying, Kayla panicked. She made up an excuse and practically ran out of the coffee shop. She spent the whole night tossing and turning, wondering why she was so scared. Mr. Rodriguez found her in the kitchen at midnight, making hot chocolate. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, pulling out 2 mugs. So she did. She told him about Alex, about her fears, about how opening her heart felt like jumping off a cliff. "Love is scary," Mr. Rodriguez said, adding extra marshmallows to her hot chocolate. "But you know what's scarier? Letting fear stop you from experiencing it." The next Tuesday, when Alex was packing up his books, Kayla took a deep breath. "About that dinner," she started. His whole face lit up. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "I know this great little pizza place." Their first date wasn't perfect. She spilled her drink, he got pizza sauce on his shirt, and they both talked too fast, too nervous to slow down. But somehow that made it better, more real. As they walked back to her car, Alex stopped under a streetlight. "You know," he said, "my grandmother always says that the best love stories are the ones that start with friendship." Kayla looked at him, at his kind eyes and gentle smile, and felt something shift in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone else in. Maybe love wasn't just about the risk of getting hurt. Maybe it was about the courage to try anyway. The envelope sat unopened on Kayla's desk for 3 days. Inside was information about her biological mother, information she'd finally worked up the courage to request from the foster care system. Mrs. Rodriguez had helped her with the paperwork, holding her hand through the whole process. "Whatever you decide," Mrs. Rodriguez had said, "we're here for you." Alex sat with her one evening after their coffee shop study session, looking at the envelope. "You don't have to open it today," he said softly, "or ever, if you're not ready." But Kayla knew it was time. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Her mother's name was Marie Thompson. She lived in Detroit, just a few hours away. There was a phone number, an address, and a brief note saying Marie had agreed to be contacted. The Rodriguez family gathered in the living room as Kayla shared what she'd learned. Mr. Rodriguez made his special hot chocolate, the kind with real melted chocolate and a pinch of cinnamon. They talked late into the night about what this meant, what Kayla wanted to do next. "I think I want to call her," Kayla finally said. "But would you stay with me when I do?" Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed her hand. "Of course, honey. Always." The first call was brief and awkward. Marie sounded nervous, her voice catching when she first heard Kayla speak. They managed small talk about the weather, about Kayla's classes, about Detroit. "I thought about you every day," Mary said just before they hung up. "Every single day." More calls followed. Slowly, piece by piece, Kayla learned her mother's story. About the depression that had overwhelmed her when Kayla was born. About the poverty that made her feel she couldn't provide. About the painful choice to give Kayla up, hoping she'd have a better life. "I was so young," Marie explained during one call. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But not a day goes by that I don't regret not fighting harder to keep you." Alex held Kayla through her tears after that call. "It's okay to feel everything you're feeling," he whispered. "All of it is valid." The Rodriguez family helped her process each conversation. They celebrated the good moments and comforted her through the hard ones. When Marie mentioned she was taking art classes at a community center, Mrs. Rodriguez helped Kayla pick out art supplies to send her. "Family isn't about replacing people," Mr. Rodriguez said one night as they worked on dinner together. "It's about making room for all the love that's possible." 3 months after the first call, Marie asked if she could visit. Kayla spent days cleaning her already clean room, rearranging photos, trying to decide what to wear. The Rodriguez family transformed the guest room, bought fresh flowers, and tried not to hover too much as Kayla paced the house. The moment finally came. Marie stood on the front porch, looking as nervous as Kayla felt. They had the same eyes, the same way of tucking hair behind their ears when anxious. The hug was awkward at first, then melted into something real. They'd both cried. Happy tears, sad tears, tears for lost time and new beginnings. That weekend was a blur of conversations, shared meals, and discovered connections. Marie brought old photos, including one of Kayla as a baby that she'd kept all these years. The Rodriguez family shared stories of Kayla's achievements, of her growth, of their love for her. On the last night of Marie's visit, they'd all sat in the backyard. Mr. Rodriguez grilled burgers while Mrs. Rodriguez and Marie swapped recipes. Alex, who'd been invited for dinner, played with the neighbor's dog that always wandered over. Looking around at all of them, her birth mother, her chosen family, the boy she was falling in love with, Kayla felt something settle in her heart. This wasn't the family she'd imagined as a child, but it was better. It was real, complicated, and beautiful in its own way. "You know what's amazing?" Mary said quietly, catching Kayla's eye. "Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. The more you give, the more there is." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with plates of food, setting them down on the picnic table. "Everyone grab a seat," she called out. "Family dinner time." Family. The word had so many meanings now. It meant the Rodriguez family who had chosen her. It meant Marie, working to build a relationship with her. It meant Alex, with his patient heart and understanding smile. It meant all of them together, creating something new and wonderful. That night, Kayla added a new photo to her album. All of them around the picnic table, laughing at one of Mr. Rodriguez's terrible jokes. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. All of it. Every complicated, beautiful piece. 5 years had passed since that tearful day in the counselor's office. Now, on a perfect spring morning, Kayla stood in front of a mirror in the Rodriguez family home, wearing a white graduation gown. Her tassel swayed as Mrs. Rodriguez adjusted her cap. "Remember when you used to help me do my hair for school?" Kayla asked, watching Mrs. Rodriguez's reflection. "I was so scared to ask that first time." "And now look at you." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, her eyes misty. "Graduating with honors. Teaching other girls how to care for their natural hair at the community center. You've come so far." The doorbell rang. It was Marie, arriving early, as she always did for important events. She carried a small gift box and a camera. "My baby's graduating college," she exclaimed, pulling Kayla into a tight hug. Over the past few years, their relationship had grown into something beautiful. Weekly phone calls, monthly visits, shared holidays. Marie had found her place in their extended family, never trying to replace the Rodriguez family, but adding her own kind of love to the mix. Mr. Rodriguez appeared with his camera, already taking pictures. "The first physical therapist in the family," he announced proudly. "Though technically, Alex beat you to graduation by 1 semester." Alex. Just thinking about him made Kayla smile. He was already at the ceremony venue, helping set up. They'd grown together through college, their coffee shop romance blossoming into something deep and real. He'd been there through late-night study sessions, through tough therapy cases, through every up and down. "Speaking of Alex," Mary said with a knowing smile, "did you check the gift box I brought?" Inside was a delicate silver necklace, the same one Marie had worn at her own graduation and her mother before her. "For today," Mary said softly, "and maybe for another special day soon." Kayla blushed. Alex had been acting strange lately, nervous in a way she'd never seen before. She had her suspicions about why, but didn't want to assume. The graduation ceremony was a blur of emotions. Walking across the stage, Kayla heard the cheers from multiple directions, the Rodriguez family's enthusiastic whoops, Marie's distinct happy cry, Alex's familiar whistle. But it was the celebration afterward that truly captured the journey of the past 5 years. They held it in the Rodriguez's backyard, now adorned with lights and flowers. The same picnic table where they'd first brought all their families together was laden with food: Mr. Rodriguez's famous lasagna, Marie's sweet potato pie, Mrs. Rodriguez's empanadas. Friends from college mixed with neighbors who'd watched Kayla grow. Her old social worker, Mrs. Chen, came by with congratulations and happy tears. Even Alex's grandmother was there, sharing stories with Marie about their grandmother's cooking secrets. As the sun began to set, Alex asked Kayla to take a walk with him to their favorite spot, the small garden bench where they'd had their first real conversation about family and belonging. "You know," he said, taking her hand, "5 years ago, I saw this beautiful girl in a coffee shop, looking so determined as she studied. I never could have imagined where that moment would lead." Kayla squeezed his hand. "To more spilled coffee and bad psychology puns." "To this," he said, and got down on one knee. The ring was simple and perfect, just like their love story. Through her happy tears, Kayla saw their families watching from a distance, Mrs. Rodriguez holding Mr. Rodriguez's hand, Marie wiping her eyes, Alex's grandmother beaming. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The cheers erupted again, even louder than at graduation. As Alex slipped the ring on her finger, Kayla looked around at all the people who had helped her find her way home. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, who had offered hope when Kayla needed it most. Mr. Rodriguez, who had taught her that fathers could be gentle and kind. Marie, who had found the courage to reconnect and build something new. And Alex, who had shown her that love was worth the risk. Later that night, as the party wound down, Kayla found herself sitting at the old picnic table again. Mrs. Rodriguez joined her, bringing 2 cups of her special hot chocolate. "Did you ever imagine," Kayla asked, "that day in your office that we'd end up here?" Mrs. Rodriguez wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I hoped," she said simply. "Love always hopes." Looking up at the stars, Kayla felt the weight of the ring on her finger, the warmth of family around her, the fullness in her heart. From a scared foster kid to a college graduate with a bright future and a family bigger than she'd ever dreamed possible, it had been quite a journey. "You know what I've learned," she said softly. "Family isn't about where you start. It's about all the hearts that choose to love you along the way." The night wrapped around them like a warm blanket, full of love, laughter, and a promise of more beautiful chapters to come. Kayla's story wasn't just about finding a family anymore. It was about becoming part of a beautiful tapestry of love, woven from choice, chance, and the courage to believe in better days.